The debate over the existence of extraterrestrial life is centered around two basic questions: whether life exists on other planets, and whether any of that life has ever visited Earth, say in the Midwest somewhere. There are some who believe that aliens are not only real, but have been visiting us for so long that people have been hiding evidence of those mini ET spin-offs in famous works of art for centuries. So, today we're going to take a look at some classical paintings that appear to contain UFOs. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel. After that, leave a comment and let us know what other paranormal theories about the past you would like to hear about. Okay, does the X-Files have an art history department? In the Hitachi region of Japan in 1803, a saucer-shaped vessel with glass windows and metal plates washed ashore. The object came to be called Utsurubune, which means hollow boat. The event and accompanying illustrations were immortalized in three major texts: Toen Shosetsu in 1825, Hyoru Kishu in 1835, and Ume no Chiri in 1844. And the accompanying sketches really do resemble what we tend to think of as a UFO. According to some legends, a beautiful woman emerged from the ship wearing unusual clothes and carrying a mysterious box with strange lettering on it. This has led some experts to classify the tale as a myth that grew out of Japan's isolationism and hostility towards the outside world. Or it was a ghost spaceship. What? Well, they must have them. Domenico Ghirlandaio painted the Madonna with Saint Giovannino in the 15th century during the height of the Italian Renaissance. If you look closely in the background, you can see a shepherd with his dog pointing at an object in the sky. We don't know who this 15th century Roy Neri is, but his dog seems to be barking at the strange object. And the Madonna is painted with her back to it, which has led some to conclude that she's protecting the baby, Saint Giovannino, from seeing it. Maybe because he'd want one for himself, and she would be stuck running all over town looking for one. While some say the scene is a record of a UFO sighting, experts believe that given the subject of the painting, it's more likely to be some type of religious symbolism. Theories include that the object is an angel, a star, a planet, or some archaic bit of Christian iconography that has since been forgotten. Cave paintings have been discovered in Chernobyl, India, that seem to depict flying saucers and creepy, faceless humanoid figures. Despite being created around 10,000 years ago, the drawings and carvings bear a striking resemblance to the UFOs and aliens we see in science fiction movies and TV shows made since the mid-20th century. Guess they haven't updated their spaceship technology in a while. Citizens of Chernobyl and their government have been so compelled by these findings that they've gone to NASA to request further investigation. And some believe the images depict the inhabitants of the area worshiping the figures emerging from UFOs, leading to the conclusion that extraterrestrials may have ruled Earth at one point in history. Hey, maybe good samosas are hard to find in Andromeda. Mazzolino de Panicali painted a scene of snowfall in August at the Church of Santa Maria Maggiore in Rome during the 15th century. The painting is a depiction of the legend of Pope Liberius and Giovanni discovering a patch of unmelted snow in Rome in August of 352. Today, we call that a ski resort. So far, this story just sounds like the ancient Weather Channel. But it's incredibly rare to have snow in Rome, even in the winter. In other words, for snow to fall in August would require divine intervention. According to the story, the patch of snow was a sign from Mother Mary, who among her many other qualities could apparently control the weather like Storm in X-Men. She wanted them to build a church in that spot, and since she was Mary, they felt pretty enthusiastic about fulfilling her wishes. Above the patch of snow, there are what seems to be dozens of saucer-shaped flying objects. According to conventional wisdom, despite how much they look like UFOs, these objects were really just meant to depict more snow. But in an interesting postscript, on October 27, 1954, in Florence, Italy, thousands of people reported sightings of UFOs in the sky, followed by a light dusting of a white, cotton-like substance that disintegrated when it touched people's hands. In fact, a football match was stopped as an entire stadium looked up at what appeared to be a floating egg above Stadio Artemio Franchi. Athlete Ardico Magnini even reported seeing silver glitter rain down from the sky after the UFO appeared. Ooh, an interstellar glitter bomb. The strange incident from October 1954 remains unexplained, But many have noted that it does bear a striking resemblance to the legend depicted in Panicale's Miracle of the Snow. That's life imitating art, all right. In the early 18th century, painter Art de Gelder painted an image of John the Baptist living up to his namesake by baptizing Jesus. But you might not notice the baptism part, since most of the painting is devoted to what Fox Mulder sees behind his eyelids every night. What appears to be a flying saucer in the sky, beaming light toward Jesus and John. The Scullys of the world, on the other hand, believe the image is a reference to Matthew 3:16, which describes the baptism of Jesus. As soon as Jesus was baptized, he went up out of the water. At that moment, heaven was opened, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting on him. In this reading, the alleged UFO would actually be the Spirit of God. Despite the fact he wasn't an eyewitness to the baptism, believers maintain that Art de Gelder was using his skill to depict his belief that aliens were present during the baptism of Christ. Let's hope they brought a good gift, like a Fortnite gift card. The Sveteshovely is an Eastern Orthodox cathedral near Tbilisi, the current capital of Georgia, the country, not the state. The cathedral's construction began in the 4th century BCE by King Mirian III, but was completed between the years 1010 and 1029. The cathedral's frescoes faded over time, but the one that has come to the attention of UFO enthusiasts is believed to have been painted in the 1600s by an unknown artist. If you look below each of Jesus' arms in the fresco, you'll see what looks like a jellyfish. One red on the left and one white on the right. As many have pointed out, however, they also look like they could be UFOs, with beams of light shooting under them. Or maybe he was just blessing some invertebrates. According to art historians, Eastern Orthodox religious art from this time featured a sun and a moon in every depiction of the crucified Christ, and the two objects commonly taken to be UFOs are probably just stylized depictions of those astronomical bodies. Did you know what famous movie has two suns? Star Wars. And what's Star Wars full of? Aliens. Checkmate, Sveteshovely Cathedral fresco. Italian artist Carlo Crivelli painted the Annunciation with Saint Emilius in 1486, during what was pretty much the height of the Italian Renaissance. In this depiction of the angel Gabriel telling the Virgin Mary she would give birth to Jesus, there seems to be a flying saucer emerging from the sky, shooting a beam of light directly at Mary's head. While this structure looks very much like a flying saucer, art historians argue that it's actually intended to be a cloud of angels. And sure enough, if you zoom in close enough, you can see what appears to be angels' wings in a circle. Of course, that only begs the question, are angels extraterrestrials? Technically, right? Because they don't live on Earth. Whoa, we just blew our own minds. This 17th century painting was found in a medieval church in Transylvania. So before we get to aliens, we're going to go ahead and assume it has something to do with Dracula. Who else would torch a church in vampire country? Beyond that, the painting, Israel Put Your Hope in the Lord, was made for the monastery church in the medieval citadel of Shageshvar, and it seems to be clearly depicting a burning church surrounded by billowing smoke, with a strange flying saucer above it. The saucer even seems to have a trail of exhaust following it, sort of like a medieval version of the Independence Day poster. Under the painting, the words scrawled in calligraphy read, Israel hoffe auf den Herrn, which translates to, Israel, put your hope in the Lord. So if the UFOs are blowing up the church, would that make the Lord the Will Smith of this story? Or the Jeff Goldblum? Or maybe even the Randy Quaid? This fresco is located at the Visoki Dečani Monastery in Kosovo, Serbia. And in the upper corners of the left and right panels, there seem to be flying objects controlled by visible pilots and streaming rays of light. It's honestly hard to imagine how something from this era could depict a more obvious spaceship than this. But experts don't think you should get too excited. As we previously mentioned, somewhere in all Eastern Orthodox depictions of Christ on the crucifix, there is a sun and a moon. Those experts believe that the two objects which look like they could grace the cover of any 1950 sci-fi comic book are once again just highly stylized depictions of the sun and moon. UFOologists, on the other hand, believe it's proof that the artist was trying to capture an alien visitation. What do you think? Okay, so if all these pictures of UFOs are near misses, Surely a totally unambiguous painting of a dude squaring off with an alien that would make Ridley Scott take a step back will silence the naysayers, right? Well, this painting was created by Michael Pacher, a painter who played a role in introducing the Renaissance to Germany in the 15th century. It depicts Saint Wolfgang, who was hoping to build a church, but was having issues finding generous benefactors to help him pay for it. So in the painting, the devil presents him a deal. He'll help the bishop build the church as long as the bishop promises to hand over the first soul to step inside. According to the legend, Saint Wolfgang took the deal, which seems wildly out of character for a saint. Then he tricked the devil by using a loophole. Which, okay, there's the saint stuff we'd read about. The story goes that a hunter emerged from the forest chasing a wolf. So Wolfgang opened the door to let the wolf in. A heck of a break, but it worked. The wolf was claimed by the devil and a human soul was spared. Churchgoers could now sit through services smugly knowing that the devil himself built the church. Although from what we know of the devil, he probably made the pews a little too small or something. The painting shows a winged creature with hooved feet and another face on its backside. Given how much more it looks like an alien than a demon, some hypothesized that the artist was depicting an extraterrestrial visitor. Or he may have just been the H.R. Giger of drawing demons. Either way, you probably wouldn't try to shake that creature down for a free church. So kudos to Wolfgang. In the late 1690s, France's King Louis XIV locked up a mysterious prisoner in his favorite new prison, the Bastille. Famous stories by Voltaire and Alexandre Dumas, based on the man's identity, are popular to this day. The story captured the public imagination, spawning countless stories, animations, parodies, films, and other art for centuries, following the real-life events. But the real story historians recently uncovered is a strange story all on its own. Today, we're exploring the real identity of the man in the Iron Mask. Speculation regarding the prisoner's identity was always a hot topic among historians. In 2016, however, historians made a breakthrough in the nearly 400-year-old mystery. Drumroll, please. According to history professor Paul Sonino, not the actor who played Paulie in Goodfellas, the mysterious man was probably a valet named Eustache Dauger. After that, the story gets a little tricky. Historians tend to agree that while Dauger was most likely a valet, it's unclear who he worked for and why the authorities guarded him so closely for the better part of 3 decades. His arrest warrant from 1669 included specific instructions to limit his contact with other prisoners. It also threatened him with death if he spoke one word except about his actual needs. Clearly, someone, Mazarin, had something to hide. Sonino concluded Dauger was probably a valet for Cardinal Mazarin's treasurer. Mazarin was a principal minister in France during the period and acquired a massive fortune. Sonino's theory suggests Dauger knew Mazarin ripped off the previous king and queen, stealing some of their vast fortunes. When Dauger spoke out against it, he suffered severe punishment, most likely to protect Mazarin's identity. The story of the man in the Iron Mask began as a rumor. In 1687 and 1698, reports of the mysterious prisoner's transfer from various prisons circulated among the public. The reports were consistent in mentioning the prisoner wore an iron mask each time spectators saw him. These accounts fit with first-hand descriptions of the man from prison officials and guards from the period. In his memoir, one Bastille guard wrote the tale of a man who is always masked and whose name is never pronounced. Because the mask obscured the prisoner's identity, it ultimately led to persistent rumors and wild speculation on who he was and why Louis XIV imprisoned him in the first place. Further deepening the mystery, the prison supposedly incinerated everything he owned after his death in 1703. Other reports and rumors say authorities also scrubbed the walls of his prison cell clean following his death. Whether or not this is true, it still captured public attention, and the myth of the man in the Iron Mask was born. In his book, The Search for the Man in the Iron Mask, a historical detective story, historian Paul Sonino makes a compelling point. The mask probably wasn't made of iron. Over the years, many historians believe the mask was velvet, not iron. It's also just as likely the prisoner didn't wear the mask all the time. It was probably only worn to obscure his identity as authorities transferred him from prison to prison. While the man in the velvet mask doesn't have quite the same ring to it, the material does make more historical sense. Velvet masks were popular at the time as accessories or to protect their skin from the sun. People also used them to keep their identities secret while doing certain activities. But that's a story for another time. The famous French writer and philosopher Voltaire spent much of his time researching, writing, and corresponding with others. He also had plenty of run-ins with the authorities due to his heavy criticism of the government. In 1717, Voltaire found himself incarcerated at the Bastille after writing a particularly cutting verse about a regent in one of his works. While there, he collected stories about the mysterious masked man from older prisoners who claimed they knew him. Voltaire took some creative liberties with the story. His version was likely the first to add the bit about the mask being iron. His description made the mask sound like something from the movie Saw. In one description, he wrote, "The chin of the mask was composed of steel springs, which gave him liberty to eat with it on." Voltaire's story asserts the prisoner must have been important because he received good food, had good manners, received regular visits from the governor, and even played guitar. Alexandre Dumas began his career writing plays and magazine articles. Later, he penned several popular novels, including The Count of Monte Cristo, The Corsican Brothers, and The Three Musketeers. Captivated by the story of the mysterious prisoner, Dumas decided to base a character in one of his novels on Daudet. Dumas wrote about the man in the iron mask in the third volume of the D'Artagnan romances. In The Vicomte de Bragelonne, Dumas' take on the mysterious prisoner eventually became one of the most popular. In the story, Dumas put forth the idea that the man in the iron mask was the twin brother of Louis XIV. As such, he presented a threat to the king's legitimacy. The idea persisted and became the basis of the 1998 film adaptation of the tale, starring Leonardo DiCaprio, although it departed quite a bit from the source material. Before Cennino came along, there was no shortage of theories about the prisoner's identity. Many of these theories pointed to members of the royal family. Some thought the man might have been Louis de Bourbon, the banished son of Louis XIV. Others surmised the prisoner to be the king's cousin, Francois de Bourbon. Maybe the masked man was an Italian count named Ercole Mattioli, imprisoned for double-crossing the king. However, these were unlikely as Mattioli died in 1694, and Francois de Bourbon fell in battle while the prisoner served his time. From there, things get weirder. Theories claiming Louis XIV used the mask on multiple men as a means to punish his wife's lovers were popular, but there was another theory that trumped them all. For a long time, everyone thought the identity behind the mask was probably Louis XIV's disgraced financier, Nicolas Fouquet. Following Cardinal Mazarin's death, Fouquet eagerly stepped into his role. Eventually, Fouquet gained power and status by handling funds for both the state and various nobility. But he was probably a bit too good at the job. His enormous fortune ignited suspicion from others, and it wasn't long before his rivals began to keep a close eye on his activities. They had a good reason, as Fouquet made no effort to hide his ambition from others. What else would you expect from a guy whose family motto in Latin was Quo non ascendet, which translates to, "What heights will he not scale?" His family emblem depicting a squirrel collecting acorns at the foot of a tree probably didn't help matters much either. Fouquet had no idea he was under a secret investigation by Louis XIV's advisor, Colbert. With ambitions to become finance minister himself, Colbert suggested to Louis XIV that Fouquet built his wealth by skimming funds from the state's coffers. By the time Fouquet threw an honorary celebration for the king at his opulent Château Vaux-le-Vicomte, his days as finance minister were numbered. Intending to impress the king with his fabulous chateau, the party had the opposite effect. As Louis XIV looked around at the grand architecture, glorious gardens, and a brand new play from Molière, he seethed on the inside. Fouquet's faux pas, outshining the king with the design of his home and the magnificent party, ultimately sealed his fate. It didn't take long for the king's musketeers to arrest Fouquet after meeting with the royal advisors. He faced a 3-year trial on trumped-up charges of treason against the state. Although public opinion eventually sided with him, the king felt differently. Fearing private citizens having any real power or influence, he commuted Fouquet's sentence from exile to life imprisonment. Fouquet lived the rest of his days behind the walls of the fortress of Pignerol. Barely anyone saw him during this time, leading some to believe Fouquet to be the mysterious masked prisoner at the time, despite some inconsistencies with the story. Though Daudet is still the most likely identity of the prisoner, these stories served a larger purpose than being a mere legend. The reports fueled people who saw Louis XIV as a tyrant and wanted to take him down. As the stories of the masked prisoner spread further after Doge's death, the king's enemies used them to paint the king in a negative light. The Dutch even spread rumors that the man in the Iron Mask was Louis XIV's real father, ultimately attempting to challenge the king's legitimacy. Though the tale of the man in the Iron Mask isn't much of a mystery anymore, it continues to capture the public imagination and remains an essential part of French history. Growing up, the Bermuda Triangle was a big deal. The mysterious trilateral territory boasts tales of ships and planes going missing, gone without a trace. But once speculation stops and science steps in, it's clear that the whole mystery is fairly easy to explain. Today, we're talking about the Bermuda Triangle and debunking the myths surrounding this conspiracy. Okay, now let's get lost in some weird history. The one thing everybody knows about the Bermuda Triangle is that people go missing there. Ever since Flight 19 and its 14 crew members disappeared in the area in 1945, legends of this cursed section of sea have skyrocketed as more and more aircraft and people go missing. What most people don't appreciate about the triangle is that it's big, really big. While maps of the supposed area tend to differ, it can generally be described as the area spanning from Miami to San Juan, then stretching all the way to the island of Bermuda. That's a pretty hefty hunk of ocean. All that space is smack dab in the middle of high traffic areas when it comes to boats and planes. And naturally, with a lot of traffic and a big, deep ocean, you're going to see a lot of people go missing. Or more accurately, you're not going to see them. One generally curious aspect of the Bermuda Triangle isn't its penchant for magically gobbling up every ship that enters its domain. It's the clouds, man. The skies that float above the triangle are filled with unusual hexagonal-shaped clouds, with perfectly straight edges that can span from 20 to 55 miles across. We know this sounds like something out of Sesame Street with all these shapes, but the reality is not so pleasant. These precarious polygons create some pretty dangerous air blasts. The winds they generate reach up to 170 miles per hour and can slam any unfortunate vessels which happen to be in the area at the time. And that's not all they can do. These clouds are also capable of shooting the bursts of air directly down on top of planes, which in turn creates 45-foot waves for any ships that survive the initial blast. A real combo attack. Hexagon clouds were probably not the shape you expected to be the culprit here. While we're on the subject of storms, we have to bring up hurricanes. After all, the Atlantic Ocean is just lousy with them. And while the Atlantic coastlines may look lovely, they're also a veritable hotbed for inclement weather. Within the triangle itself, the cold air fronts that meet with the warm water create the perfect cocktail of chaotic weather. You don't want to be a weary water traveler when that happens. But as the story goes, too many do brave the nasty tempests and pay the price for not respecting the triangle. Everyone has their theories about what causes the disappearances in the Bermuda Triangle. Some say alien abductions. Others think sea monsters are responsible. But one scientist, Karl Kruszelnicki, says he can easily explain all the disappearances. His theory replaces aliens with bad weather and sea monsters with plain old human error. The patch of sea where the Bermuda Triangle calls home is a particularly rough patch when it comes to the sky, the air, and, well, all of it. Pair that with high amounts of air and sea traffic driven by accident-prone humans, and you have yourself a recipe for disaster. Kruszelnicki believes the combination of the high waves and even higher winds is a lethal trap for a distracted or inexperienced pilot or sailor. The triangle gets a bad rep for the sheer surplus of ships and planes it devours. So much so that it is the subject of many statistical studies. One such study done by Lloyd's of London and the United States Coast Guard showed that, in fact, the Bermuda Triangle just ain't that special. The results from the study showed that the loss of life and cargo is really the same percentage-wise as most any other area. They just don't brag about it as much. But media bias against the triangle aside, you can't really define such a large, dangerous area and then be surprised when vessels start to go missing there. It's practically expected. In your mind, picture a big wave. Bigger, bigger. Yes, that's the one. Now, Multiply that by about 10. That's around how large waves can rise up out of the ocean at just about any old time they want. When the weather's rough, it's not surprising to see waves up to 98 feet high. Obviously, that's bad news for any ship sailing the ocean blue at that time. But waves that high are also capable of knocking low-flying planes right out of the sky. The study done by Lloyd's of London seems to back up this theory, and even attributes a 49-foot sporadic wave and sailor inexperience as the cause for the loss of Flight 19, which we'll get to later. Flight 19 was the name given to a group of 5 torpedo bombers that became famous for going completely MIA. It isn't every day that 5 planes, 14 airmen, and the subsequent team sent to find them all vanish without a trace. And the little evidence or statistical analysis at the time only led to a wave of conjecture and whisper down the lane type shenanigans. This was the 1960s, well before you could take the internet out of your pocket and debunk something instantly. When word of the Navy fleet disappearing all over the Atlantic began to spread, so did the tall tales. Capitalizing on this triangle frenzy were writers that only served to add more flame to the fires of speculation. An Argosy magazine article titled "The Deadly Bermuda Triangle" was written by Vincent Gaddis in 1964 and started much of the lore surrounding the patch of water today. But once these stories devolve into whimsical tales about the lost city of Atlantis, it becomes harder to take them seriously. You're going to hear a lot of talk that says Flight 19 was flying in ideal conditions, and thus, their disappearance can only be explained by something otherworldly. To that, we say, hold on. Despite what some, quote, historians, end quote, will tell you about the flying conditions that fateful day, we know the facts. The most famous disappearance in Bermuda Triangle history was, as it turned out, just extremely unlucky. Since this was a training mission, the crew was less than desirable for the conditions. When you're battling 49-foot waves in a low-flying plane, you want an experienced captain, which they had. However, he was overcoming a hangover at the time. Hey, we've all been there, Cap. Like a Larry David in Curb Your Enthusiasm, where everything just gets worse and worse, things got worse. Lieutenant Charles Taylor, known for being terrible at his job, forgot his watch and had a malfunctioning compass. To make matters worse, nobody on board seemed to even know where they were. So Taylor, living up to his reputation, made a bad decision that led his men deeper into the terrible Atlantic storms and their eventual demise. Just like Curb Your Enthusiasm. While we're talking about Flight 19, we should talk about the rescue planes sent in to find them. They're part of this story too. While this crew also met their untimely demise in the Atlantic Ocean, they did not simply disappear into thin air as the legends would have you believe. As is typical, this is a detail that gets lost in the fable of it all. Not only did the rescue aircraft remain visible, it straight up exploded. Witnesses claim they saw the aircraft, which had already gained the ominous nickname of Flying Gas Tank, erupt in the sky and its remains crash into the sea. A subsequent investigation found oil and debris where the plane went down, confirming its ending in this unfortunate tale. We talked about Vincent Gaddis, the Mac Daddy of all Bermuda Triangle storytellers. Instead of getting bogged down with facts, Gaddis decided his analysis of the disappearance would sell more copies if he exaggerated the facts to add an aura of mystery. His 1964 article titled "The Deadly Bermuda Triangle" delved into the notion that the disappearances couldn't possibly be coincidence. Even though the article was published in a magazine that prided itself as an American masterpiece of fiction, the hype worked. His outlandish ideas about disappearances in the small slice of the world inspired other writers and movie makers to give their own spin on the triangle. And that is how legends are born. The Mary Celeste story is an interesting one. A large merchant ship has an uneventful career until one day it disappears. The ship was bound for Italy from New York, but never made it to its destination. It was eventually found adrift in the Atlantic. Its discovery didn't stop Bermuda Triangle speculators from blaming the missing crew and the ship's condition on the three-pointed chunk of ocean. A guy named Charles Berlitz even penned a bestseller called The Bermuda Triangle, which claimed that Mary Celeste was another victim of the triangle. The book was a world-renowned success, but there was one glaring error within the pages. The ship was found abandoned on a completely different side of the Atlantic, a couple thousand miles away. But if you're still not convinced, hey, we've got a bridge to sell you. As far as Bermuda Triangle theories go, even we have to admit this one sounds pretty badass. One explanation for the Bermuda Triangle claims that ships are disappearing into the lost city of Atlantis. The claims of force fields surrounding the city and fire crystals which can burst into pure energy are alleged to be the very things bringing down the planes and ships. What sounds like Jason Momoa working overtime may actually just be methane gas, which is still kind of like talking about Jason Momoa. Methane can become trapped in ice molecules and become methane hydrate. This one admittedly sounds like a bit of a reach, since the last time methane trapping would have been around is the Ice Age. That's like 15,000 years ago. But if this were somehow happening in the past 100 years, it would absolutely impact ships the way this Atlantis conspiracy says it would. No word on how the DC management shakeup news affects this particular theory. We've spent this whole video saying some pretty negative things about the Bermuda Triangle. So let's end with all of us saying one nice thing about the Triangle. We'll go first. Despite its bad reputation, the Triangle is not considered one of the danger zones for cargo ships. Wasn't that nice? Sure, it has its fair share of tropical storms and turbulent weather. And of course, there are disappearances. Can't forget those. But any cargo hauler will tell you there are places so undesirable for ships, they make the Bermuda Triangle look like a kiddie pool. A study in 2013 that ranked the most hostile shipping environments was done by the WWF, the wildlife one, not the hit you upside the head with a steel chair one. And wouldn't you know it, the Triangle didn't even get an honorable mention. It turns out BT is more preferred than the South China Sea, the East Indies, or the British Isles. Maybe next year, Bermuda Triangle. Maybe next year. Almost everyone has heard of the Bermuda Triangle, a small region of the North Atlantic said to have sent countless boats and aircraft to a watery grave. But you probably haven't heard of the Lake Michigan Triangle. With sunken ships, vanishing aircraft, and UFO sightings, this allegedly haunted area of the Great Lakes has earned a reputation for the frightening and unexplainable. So, today we're talking about the mysterious Lake Michigan Triangle. Okay, time to set sail into the uncharted waters of weird history. On the Wisconsin side, there's Manitowoc. On the Michigan side, there's Ludington to the north and Benton Harbor to the south. Unexplained phenomena and frightening legends related to the region date all the way back to the late 17th century, when a French vessel disappeared with the tide, never to be seen again. The French explorer René Robert Cavelier, Sieur de la Salle, started working on a massive ship designed for animal fur hauling, and decided to name it Le Griffon. In August of 1679, his wood was finally ship-shape, and they set sail, traveling from Niagara to Michilimackinac. Some historians say the ship had larger ambitions beyond the outpost, to discover a northwest passage to China and Japan, which would have been a pretty long trip, but that's why they call it exploring. Unfortunately, Le Griffon vanished while traversing the Lake Michigan Triangle. LaSalle had already departed for the mainland, and his remaining 6 crew members met the same fate as his ship. In 2001, a researcher named Steve Libert found what he claimed to be Le Griffon's bowsprit at the bottom of Lake Michigan. Libert's findings have yet to be verified, but the spar did include sculptures of griffins, the ship's namesake, which would be a strange coincidence. Sadly, the rest of the ship has never been recovered. 200 years later, the deadliest open water sinking on the Great Lakes would propel the Lake Michigan Triangle into infamy. In the wee hours of September 8, 1860, the wooden-hulled sidewheel steamship PS Lady Elgin collided with the much smaller schooner Augusta, which was loaded down with lumber and headed for Chicago. You really need to be extra alert during lumber season. Those boats don't exactly stop on a dime. Strangely, the smaller ship seemed untouched after the collision. The Augusta continued on for Chicago like nothing happened, as the Lady Elgin took on more and more water. Hundreds of sleeping passengers who had been partying all night received a rude awakening when the ship's crew began their evacuation efforts. Witnesses said shipmates did everything possible to cover the hole, including trying to plug it with mattresses, but nothing worked. The lake seemed determined to swallow the ship. 300 people perished as a result of the crash, including the Lady Elgin's captain, Jack Wilson, who spent his final hours saving as many passengers as possible. Built in 1870, the 132-foot-long, 3-masted schooner Thomas Hume was part of a fleet of ships that belonged to lumber baron and general old-timey rich guy Charles Hackney when it disappeared within the Lake Michigan Triangle in 1891. Sailing alongside one of its sister ships, the Rouse Simmons, the Thomas Hume embarked from Muskegon to Chicago with a large shipment of lumber. After delivering the wood, both ships turned around to venture back toward Muskegon. Seeing ominous storm clouds gathering in the distance, the crew of the Rouse Simmons decided to turn back and stay in Chicago until the weather improved, which, considering it was Chicago, must have really said something about the weather. But the Thomas Hume kept on toward home, never to be seen again. When the Rouse Simmons returned to Muskegon 2 days later, there was no sign of its sister ship in the harbor. Hackey and his business partner put up a $300 reward for information on the Hume's whereabouts, but the ship and its 7 crew members were nowhere to be found. Multiple search operations also resulted in failure. Fast forward to 2005, when professional recovery diver Taras Lysenko found the intact remains of the Thomas Hume in the southeastern portion of Lake Michigan. Shipwreck experts have since shared their theories about what likely happened to the ship. A prevailing theory is that the storm produced turbulent seas, which caused the vessel to capsize. Should have waited out the storm at a Cubs game. And even though it had avoided disaster in 1891, the Rouse Simmons later succumbed to the Lake Michigan Triangle on November 22, 1912. Apparently, the Triangle operates under the same rules as the Final Destination films. The ship and its 16 crew members, including Captain Hermann Schunemann, decided to sail from Thompson, Michigan to Chicago, all to deliver a load of at least 5,000 Christmas trees. But the boat never made it. On November 23rd, the ship was seen flying a distress flag in clear conditions, which was eerie. That could mean anything from an injured crew member to an infestation of pirate ghosts. But when a rescue boat finally arrived at the location, there was no sign of the Rouse Simmons anywhere. Wreckage from the ship, including Christmas trees and Captain Schunemann's wallet, washed ashore in the following decades, temporarily transforming the beach into an especially obvious Banksy painting. Yeah, I don't get that joke either. But it wasn't until October 1971 that the Rouse Simmons was finally found by scuba diver Gordon Kent Bell-Richard off the coast of Two Rivers, Wisconsin. In late October of 1921, the Rosabelle left High Island, Michigan, bound for Benton Harbor. But the ship encountered some kind of disturbance along the way, and its wreckage was found 42 miles from Milwaukee. None of the ship's 11 crew members were accounted for, and their remains were never recovered. While some people claim the Rosabelle met its demise during a storm, others believe it was involved in some sort of clash with another vessel. But considering no accidents were reported by any other ships in the area at the time, that theory doesn't hold much water. Hey, there are only so many boat jokes. You knew we were going to get to a water pun sooner or later. So what really happened to Rosabelle? To this day, no one knows. The fact that the ship's yawl, or two-headed sail, was never recovered potentially adds another layer to an already complex mystery. People have suggested that the yawl may have been taken by a souvenir by whomever or whatever sank the ship. Just in case you thought that boats were the only things at risk in the Lake Michigan Triangle, consider the story of George R. Donner, captain of the coal-powered vessel McFarland, who vanished from his cabin on April 29, 1937. Days earlier, the McFarland had picked up a shipment of coal from Erie, Pennsylvania. The ship had no problems traversing the Great Lakes on its return voyage until it arrived in the Triangle. After successfully guiding his ship through rough, icy waters, Captain Donner retired to his quarters late on April 28th to get a few hours of sleep. When the McFarland's first mate knocked on Captain Donner's door as they approached Port Washington early on April 29th, there was no answer. The door to the captain's quarters was locked, so the crew searched the galley for their skipper, but there was no sign of him anywhere. This prompted the men to break down Captain Donner's door, believing he'd fallen into a deep coma-like sleep, or maybe he was totally hammered. Hey, he was a sea captain. Instead of discovering their captain inside sleeping off a massive hangover, the crew found nothing but an empty cabin. Captain Donner was never found, and the case remains as much of an enigma as it was in 1937. Arguably, even more upsetting than a plane crash is a plane vanishing forever, its passengers never to be recovered. That's what happened to Northwest Airlines Flight 2501 in 1950 while flying over the Lake Michigan Triangle. En route from New York City to Seattle, the plane had reached the eastern shoreline of Lake Michigan just after midnight on June 24th. The plane's captain, Robert C. Lind, requested clearance from air traffic control to descend to 2,500 feet in order to avoid a lightning storm brewing over the Great Lake. Captain Lind's request was denied, and a short time later, the plane vanished. Lind, 2 crew members, and 55 passengers disappeared along with it. At the time the plane went MIA, a local on the ground told reporters he saw a terrific flash out in the lake. This strange light was seen by plenty of others, one of who explained it was a funny light. It looked like the sun when it goes down. It only lasted a second and then was gone. These ghostly sights and sounds have led to speculations that something supernatural, even extraterrestrial, caused the plane to go missing. Sort of like that Stephen King miniseries, The Langoliers, which was better than people give it credit for. The worst commercial airplane disaster of its time, the disappearance of Flight 2501 remains mired in mystery. The only clues ever recorded were some bits of debris and scattered remains that washed ashore. Subsequent searches have failed to recover the aircraft. For a time, adventure fiction writer Clive Cussler funded an annual quest to retrieve Northwest Flight 2501 from its watery grave. But every year, the search team returned to shore empty-handed. Not even an old boot or a cartoon fish skeleton? Man, nothing was biting that day. In February 1978, West Michigander Steve Kubatsky was reported missing during a cross-country skiing expedition. As authorities swept the area for signs of Kubatsky, they discovered a set of footprints that led right to the eastern shore of Lake Michigan, and then ended abruptly, like he'd just been raptured or had returned to his kingdom beneath the waves. After Kubatsky's skis and backpack were recovered nearby, everyone assumed he'd fallen through the surface ice on the lake and met his demise, even though the ice and snow over Lake Michigan were especially thick that winter. But in a shocking twist, Kubatsky woke up in a grassy field 15 months later in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, 700 miles east of where he'd disappeared. He had no memory of where he'd been for over a year, or how he'd managed to end up so far away from home. His last memory was of reaching Lake Michigan. Kubatsky refused to discuss his situation after his initial rescue, and to this day remained silent about the event, which is understandable. Nobody likes reliving the time they entered a Belushi trance and wandered halfway across the country. He may have started a second family somewhere. Or worse, he may have started a band. For whatever reason, Michigan experiences an abnormally high number of UFO sightings compared to other states. Some residents think the Lake Michigan Triangle is to blame. According to WOOD-TV, based out of West Michigan, police have been fielding complaints about UFOs over the Lake Michigan Triangle since 1913. In 1919, the New York Times reported on 2 colossal balls of fire seen falling into the Great Lake. The Sausalito News in California noted that the impact was heard as far away as Indiana. The New York Times called the objects meteors, but other eyewitnesses claim they were metaphysical forces wreaking havoc. Although, considering the Lake Michigan Triangle's history and reputation, it could have been aliens hauling lumber. On March 8, 1994, hundreds of Michigan residents along Lake Michigan reported seeing disc-like objects hovering over them, some with flashing lights. Among the witnesses was a local National Weather Service radar operator who told police, "I've never seen anything like this, not even when I'm doing storms. These aren't storms. Spooky. Makes you wonder how many boats Fox Mulder must have lost in Lake Michigan." There's a deep cut. Archaeology professor Mark Hawley and his colleague Brian Abbott discovered a circular stone arrangement in 40 feet of water while using sonar technology to search for shipwrecks in the Lake Michigan Triangle in 2007. Along the periphery of the rocks, Hawley and Abbott also found a boulder marked with a prehistoric carving of the long-extinct mastodon, suggesting that the formation could be several thousand years old. Some think the Stonehenge-like arrangement served a ceremonial purpose, while others believe it was built to dam up the lake in order to make fishing easier. Research into the rock formations remains ongoing, and in order to respect indigenous groups whose ancestors may have erected Lake Michigan's underwater Stonehenge, the exact location of the structures is being kept secret. Although if every horror movie ever made is any indication, they should probably just leave those rocks alone. Cyclopses, unicorns, and other mythological creatures obviously never really existed. Probably. And while we can't ever be fully certain about the origins of ancient beliefs and superstitions about these creatures, there are some pretty compelling theories about why people may have believed in them. Today, we're taking a look at some surprisingly plausible, real-life explanations for mythical creatures. Okay, this is another fine myth we've gotten ourselves into. Theories abound for the origin of the massive one-eyed Cyclops from ancient Greek and Roman mythology. There's a real condition known as cyclopia that can affect human fetuses, causing one eye cavity to drift toward the center of the skull. But this almost always results in miscarriages or stillbirths, rather than producing gigantic living people with just one eye in the center of their heads. Most ancient people were likely unaware that this condition even exists. Another real medical condition, known as acromegaly disorder, can cause a number of symptoms, including enlargement of the hands, feet, and face, and limited vision. This aligns in some ways with the description of the Cyclops in literature. It is possible that the creature's one eye was metaphorical, indicating a more generally limited ability to see. It's also possible that stories about the Cyclops simply emerged from accounts of people with just one eye, or even perhaps people wearing cleverly disguised eye patches. But perhaps the most compelling theory centers around elephant skulls, particularly those left behind by the long-extinct Cretan dwarf mammoth. These skulls would be much smaller than those from a modern-day elephant, and notably have a large hole in the center. This was where the animal's trunk connected to the rest of its head. But on a glance, it kind of resembles a big eye socket. It's entirely possible that ancient people found skeletal remains of dwarf mammoths, assumed these were humanoid creatures with just one major honking eye in the center of their heads, and began to tell stories about the mighty Cyclops. The creature from the Odyssey, not the X-Man, probably. Tales of flying snakes were very common in ancient Egypt. The Greek historian Herodotus wrote down anecdotes from Arabian travelers about small winged serpents that apparently lived in boswellia trees, making them much more dangerous to harvest for frankincense oil. Herodotus himself claimed to have visited an area in Arabia known as Butos, which contained a massive number of animal skeletons, some of which looked like the remains of giant flying snakes. Herodotus' narrative aligns with another ancient Egyptian story about a shipwrecked sailor who washes ashore on a beautiful island and encounters an enormous serpent. The serpent speaks to the man because it's an ancient story and claims it was a member of a once mighty race that was wiped out by a falling star. A popular theory on Reddit theorizes that these stories could have been inspired by a real place known as Wadi el-Hitan, or the Whale Valley. Here, thousands of ancient whale skeletons, dating back to the Eocene era, remain visible. Without more accurate knowledge of geological history, and the idea that dry land could have been underwater millions of years earlier, it's entirely possible ancient people mistook these whale remains or other similar deposits for the skeletons of flying snakes. Those flippers do kind of look like wings. The Egyptians were one of many ancient cultures that believed in the existence of giant sea snakes. Everyone loves a good sea monster. It's possible that living whales could have inspired some of these stories, because when you think about it, whales are basically sea monsters. When pods of humpbacks are swimming nearby, for example, humans only see their backs and their mouths emerging above the surface of the water. It wouldn't be difficult for a person to see multiple whales rising out of the water at once and mistake them all collectively for one giant sea serpent. It's also possible that a very real animal, the oarfish, could have inspired legends about giant ocean snakes. According to National Geographic, oarfish can grow up to 30 feet long, which is too big for any animal with the word fish in its name. And because they live in the ocean depths and only approach the surface when compelled by powerful currents, they weren't well known and recognizable for most ancient societies. A person seeing an oarfish during a rare trip near the ocean's surface, or individuals spotting a dead oarfish that washed up on shore, may have become confused and come to believe that they had seen a giant sea serpent instead. In Norse mythology, a creature known as Jormungandr, or the Midgard serpent, was a massive worm or possibly snake-type creature that lived in a space ocean encircling the Earth, which absolutely rocks. Because its body surrounded the entire planet, it was also sometimes referred to as the World Serpent, which also rocks. Normally, Jormungandr remains in a perfect circle around the Earth, biting its own tail. The Vikings believed that one day the serpent would release his tail and plunge into the earth, kick-starting the apocalyptic event known as Ragnarok, otherwise known as the best Thor movie. Some historians and scholars have suggested that the Midgard serpent myth could have been inspired by an actual event. Around 7,000 years ago, a meteorite entered the Earth's atmosphere above present-day Estonia before breaking apart and hitting the ground. The resulting Kali meteorite crater field is still visible on the Estonian island of Saaremaa to this day. This was one of human history's largest meteorite strikes near a populated area, and would have been sufficiently devastating. Wiping out a lot of wildlife and probably even a few people is enough for the surrounding population to have spoken about it for generations. You don't forget the night an exploding rock fell from the sky. It's certainly possible that they may have attached religious or supernatural significance to such a massive, inexplicable, and terrifying event. The reality of living in the dangerous world of the Bronze Age, or even the Stone Age before that, likely inspired a lot of mythological stories in all kinds of ways. For example, it's long been suspected that myths and folktales about vampires originated in real reports about people suffering from rabies. Our modern understanding of vampire myths was codified by author Bram Stoker in his wildly influential 1897 novel, Dracula. But stories about vampires predate the book by several centuries. A rabies outbreak that ravaged Hungary in the 1700s may have been a significant source for vampire lore. The disease would have impacted mostly men, and some of the symptoms can include hypersexuality, insomnia, an objection to certain strong odors like garlic, as well as sensitivity to mirrors and bright lights. Obviously, these all have clear counterparts in vampire stories, including Count Dracula himself, a seductive, masculine figure who stays up all night stalking victims, hates garlic, and can't see his own reflection. Many contemporary anthropologists and scholars believe that Aboriginal stories from natives of Australia and Oceania, known collectively as Dreamtime, were influenced by the real natural world of the late Ice Age. Some Dreamtime narratives date back over 65,000 years, so it is likely that they do refer to long-extinct creatures and plant life that early humans actually encountered long ago. A mythological creature known as the Bunyip, for example, supposedly had a long neck, round head, and large ox-like body, and lived near swamps and other shallow bodies of water. We now know from the fossil record that a creature known as the Diprotodon roughly fits this description, and would have lived in Australia's marshlands around 65,000 years ago. The creature would also have stood over 6 feet tall, making an encounter likely very memorable for an early human. Your shorts don't stay dry after that kind of meeting. It's possible the Diprotodon may have inspired stories, anecdotes, and even folklore. Middle Eastern legends about a gigantic bird known as Roc, capable of grabbing and carrying away large mammals like elephants for food, may have been rooted in some form of reality. Though the Roc has long been thought of as a purely fictional creation, mentioned in the narrative anthology 1001 Nights and the writings of Venetian traveler Marco Polo, the stories were likely based on a real animal, sometimes known as the elephant bird of Madagascar. This was a large, ostrich-like bird that stood around 9 feet high, weighed about 1,000 pounds, and probably went extinct in the 16th or 17th century. I guess he flew too close to the sun. Admiral Étienne de Flacourt describes the creature in detail in his Histoire de la Grande Île de Madagascar, written in the 1600s. Even Polo's anecdote about a creature mentions that it was originally seen in Madagascar, making this connection even more likely. The Maori people of New Zealand also relate folk tales about a monstrous bird known as the puakaya, which is large and fierce enough to stalk and kill humans. It's possible these stories were inspired by another real animal, known as Haastseagull. This was the largest ever eagle species on Earth, weighing in at around 30 pounds with a wingspan of around 10 feet. In other words, it was a big damn eagle. Though the eagles primarily fed on flightless birds, it's theoretically possible they could have also posed a threat to individual humans, particularly small children. Imagine being a babysitter and having to explain that to the parents. The Haastseagull would have lived around New Zealand's South Island around the year 1400, right around the time when the Maori first arrived and settled in the area. It's even possible that the Maori hunting of the moa bird, the eagle's primary food source, led to its extinction. Sometimes, an animal doesn't even need to go extinct in order for its mysterious remains to inspire folklore. For example, nearly every biological sample ever collected that was supposedly taken from a Sasquatch or Yeti has come from a dead bear. In 2016, National Geographic shared a specific story about an American black bear named Pedals, who had injured his front legs and learned to walk around upright on 2 limbs. A human sighting of another creature that had made a similar adjustment could have easily inspired legends about Bigfoot, particularly if this creature also suffered from a genetic deformity, mange, or some other illness that disguised its appearance. Such mistakes or substitutions were even more common in the ancient world, when zoological understanding and the ability to test and confirm conclusions about new species was far less advanced, and there weren't any Bigfoot hunting shows on cable. Frequently in ancient literature, writers would get the specific descriptions of exotic animals wrong. There was no photography, of course, so unless they had seen an animal with their own eyes, writers were relying on verbal or written descriptions, or sometimes crude drawings. Ancient Greek depictions of lions, for example, more closely resembled dogs than actual big cats. And the Greek word hippopotamus translates as river horse. Sure, it kind of looks like that. The point is, they didn't always get these things exactly right. Some anthropologists and historians believe that mythological tales of unicorns actually resulted from people attempting to describe real animals, such as the rhinoceros. Hundreds of years ago, there were more living varieties of rhinoceros. Creatures with multiple horns were known as rhinoceros, whereas those with just one horn were sometimes called unicorns. To this day, the genus for some Asian rhinos remains Unicornus. Recently uncovered fossil evidence points to the existence of an ancestor to the modern rhino known as a Serbian unicorn. These fur-covered giant rhinos lived in the grasslands of Eurasia around 39,000 years ago, meaning they shared the Earth with early humans. It's possible these shaggy rhinos specifically gave rise to stories about a mythological horned horse, inspiring countless Lisa Frank notebooks in the years to come.
Ah, Chernobyl. The name alone conjures images of glowing forests, haunted playgrounds, and enough ambient radiation to cook a rotisserie chicken. But all that is just the tip of the incredibly spooky iceberg when it comes to the tales people tell about the famous disaster site. And that's why today we're going to take a look at some creepy stories from Chernobyl. Grab your radiation suit because we're going in. On April 26, 1986, Chernobyl reactor number 4 exploded, triggering one of the worst nuclear disasters in history. But that wasn't about to stop New York-based nuclear physicist Andrei Korsakov from taking his vacation there in 1997. Okay, in all fairness, Andrei wasn't there for a selfie. He was there with a team to take radiation readings. But while standing outside the sealed facility, he heard someone screaming for help from inside the reactor. The problem was, no one had entered that room in years. You know, on account of the whole nuclear meltdown thing. The reactor door also required a password and a literal handprint to open. And had someone gotten in, they would have triggered an alarm. Later that evening, while the team was eating dinner, a floodlight inside the same room turned on. The team joked it was a power surge until the light turned off right as they finished the sentence. Maybe it was a glitch, or maybe someone really wanted to microwave a Hot Pocket in Hell's break room, or maybe, just maybe, it was a ghost. Possibly a ghost who needed to microwave a Hot Pocket. We can't rule it out. According to a classically trained pianist known only as Yuri, shortly after the meltdown, he and his state-sponsored musical troupe were ordered into the Chernobyl-adjacent area of Pripyat to perform for residents who had no idea there'd been a nuclear meltdown. It was a borderline suicide mission, but when you're a musician, a gig is a gig. Actually, the musicians weren't informed about what was going on either. So the show started, and as Yuri described it, the ballerina danced beautifully until her hair began falling out mid-spin. Then blood streamed from her nose and ears. The villagers weren't medical professionals, but they knew from experience that the ballerina was all but done for, and their children, themselves missing teeth and skin, offered her flowers. Then the generator died, and the stage went dark. But the flowers and the children kept glowing. Yuri escaped by hot-wiring a car and driving for days. But by the time he reached safety, he'd gone blind. He's said to be the only surviving member of the troupe. Anyway, it just goes to prove what we've always said. Don't stage a ballet in a radioactive fallout zone. Robots were supposed to clean up Chernobyl, but when they heard the plan, they went on strike. Okay, the problem was actually the radiation, which fried their circuits like a hot knife through Soviet butter. So the USSR turned to its backup plans. More ballet dancers. Nah, we're just kidding. They sent soldiers, which is just as horrible. These men were called liquidators, and they were given two choices: serve 2 years in Afghanistan, or spend 2 minutes shoveling sand onto the exposed reactor. Most picked the sand. The soldiers took a shot of vodka and ran onto the roof with shovels, knowing full well it might kill them. Many died. Others suffered long-term health problems. Turns out, vodka doesn't actually prevent radiation sickness. But when you're shoveling plutonium like it's mulch, you take what you can get. The elephant's foot is what happens when nuclear fuel, sand, concrete, metal, and Soviet regret all melt into one hideous blob of doom. It formed during the meltdown and was a glowing, lava-like mass that oozed through the reactor like it had somewhere evil to be, ultimately settling in a maintenance tunnel like a radioactive Jabba the Hutt. Back in 1986, If you stood next to it for 5 minutes, you'd be dead within 48 hours. And not like, wow, I feel dead after leg day dead. No, we're talking actual skin-melting, cell-liquefying dead. Early photos of this nuclear nightmare were taken using a wheeled camera because walking up to it was like shaking hands with the Grim Reaper. The photos show a lumpy, steaming pile that vaguely resembles, you guessed it, an elephant's foot, if the elephant was cursed by a wizard and had feet made of silly putty. Even today, the elephant's foot is still dangerous. Not insta-death dangerous, but definitely don't touch this unless you want to glow in the dark dangerous. After Chernobyl, rumors exploded like, well, Chernobyl. People claimed they'd seen giant wolves, glowing fish, and three-eyed frogs hopping around like they'd just left an audition for The Simpsons. And while we haven't officially confirmed the existence of a teenage mutant ninja bear, those earlier reports of mutant animals weren't entirely nonsense. One local piglet, for example, was born with dipygus, meaning 2 pelvises and extra legs. Basically, a double-butt pig. You can see it today at the Ukrainian National Chernobyl Museum, which is hands down the creepiest place you can visit without accidentally summoning a demon. But here's the plot twist nobody expected. Nature actually bounced back. Birds have smaller brains, rodents have fewer babies, and frogs are doing whatever radioactive frogs do. We don't know. But overall, the wildlife around Chernobyl is thriving. Turns out, once humans left, the forest basically said, "Cool, thanks. We'll handle it from here." It's like a post-apocalyptic TED Talk titled, "How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Radiation." So the moral of the story seems to be nature heals, but only after it gets rid of us. In what can only be described as historically bad timing, the Pripyat amusement park was set to open on May 1st, 1986. Instead, it opened briefly on April 27th for Chernobyl evacuees who were told that the air was deadly, but hey, there's a Ferris wheel. Today, the rusted rides are frozen in time. Moss grows on bumper cars. The swing boats haven't moved in decades. And the radioactive clown faces, because of course the abandoned amusement park has radioactive clown faces, they're still smiling. The park is so incredibly creepy, it's shown up in games like Call of Duty and Stalker, as well as every travel influencer's edgy abandoned photo shoot series. Because nothing says aesthetic like cancer dust. If the X-Files taught us anything, it's that the involvement of aliens makes everything creepier. So it's not terribly surprising that UFOs were reported hovering over Reactor 4 before and during the meltdown, casually vacuuming up excess radiation like cosmic Roombas. According to this theory, the aliens intervened to save us from an even bigger disaster, which is incredibly kind of them, especially when you consider what Ripley did to their queen. A similar claim popped up after 2011's Fukushima nuclear disaster in Japan, suggesting Earth might be the galactic equivalent of a toddler-proofed house, and aliens are just floating babysitters, sighing heavily every time we stick a fork in the nuclear outlet. If you are a connoisseur of disturbing internet videos, you may have stumbled across a grainy-looking one that shows a man near Pripyat being attacked by zombies. It circulated widely online, and enough people believed it to justify greenlighting a horror film called Chernobyl Diaries, where a group of disaster tourists get eaten by mutants. As satisfying as that sounds, however, the zombie video is fake. The footage was lifted from the 2007 video game Stalker: Shadow of Chernobyl, where mutants roam the exclusion zone after a second fictional meltdown. So while it is creepy, we're sorry to report that there are no zombies eating tourists at Chernobyl. That being said, if we can arrange another meltdown or two, who knows? You know what's worse than a meltdown? A meltdown that screams. Yes, according to some workers and investigators, the Chernobyl reactor emitted an eerie, high-pitched wailing in the moments before the explosion. Witnesses described it as a sound you feel in your bones. But was it the sound of steam pressure building in a doomed nuclear core? Or was it, as Reddit suggests, the reactor's soul leaving its body? Either way, if your building starts screaming, it might be time to bail. Our best guess is that it was a combination of structural stress, superheated steam, and a core about to yeet itself into the sky. But since the Amityville movies clearly established that a building can be possessed, we're gonna go ahead and add this one to the haunted list. Multiple witnesses, including guards, engineers, and locals, claimed to see a dark figure with glowing red eyes near Reactor 4 in the days before the explosion. Sounds fake, right? Like a publicity stunt promoting a movie about Slender Man's radioactive cousin? But here's the thing, those reports predate the disaster. And after the explosion, the sightings increased. Strange noises and apparitions continued to be observed in the wreckage for weeks. Dubbed the Black Bird of Chernobyl, some have identified this figure as a Mothman-type harbinger of doom. Skeptics, always eager to ruin the fun, say it was just a large bird, or possibly mass hysteria. Whatever the case, we say, glowing red eyes plus deadly levels of radiation equals time to nope out. In the abandoned city of Pripyat, once a bustling home to thousands of Chernobyl workers, one of the eeriest sights is to be found in the remains of a kindergarten. Inside, scattered across rotting floors and peeling linoleum, are the melted and twisted bodies of children's dolls. What makes them especially creepy isn't just their melting faces or missing limbs, but how they've been arranged. One doll was found with nails through its eyes. Another sat upright in a tiny chair holding a Geiger counter. It's disturbing as all hell, but it's supposed to be. The dolls are genuine artifacts, but the poses they're now found in were arranged by later visitors, photographers, and thrill seekers who couldn't resist making a bad scene worse. And while the radiation levels in Pripyat are generally low today, the creepy vibe in that nursery is still off the charts. Despite the protective sarcophagus, the "we fixed it" press releases, and a whole lot of finger crossing, Reactor 4 is still reacting. Scientists detected rising neutron levels, meaning nuclear fission reactions are still happening in inaccessible chambers of the ruined reactor. Like a horror movie monster that refuses to die, Chernobyl continues to whisper, sizzle, and threaten. It's not dangerous, yet, but it means there are still hot spots of radioactive fuel slowly shifting beneath the concrete. And if something destabilizes, well, let's just say the sequel might not be on HBO. It might be in real life. Is that creepy enough for you? Once upon a time in the 12th century, two children climbed out of a pit and sauntered into a quiet English town. That's the history. The weird part is that these particular children could easily be confused with Shrek and Kermit the Frog because they had bright green skin. And that's why today we're going to take a look at how the mysterious green children of Woolpit have baffled historians. Okay, looks like we've got the green light, so here we go. Two mysteriously verdant children climbed out of a wolf pit and descended on Woolpit. It sounds like the beginning of a nursery rhyme, but according to one William of Newburgh, who is credited with the earliest account of the tale, it's a true story that happened during the reign of King Stephen, sometime between 1135 and 1154. According to William's Historia Rerum Anglicarum, which was written sometime around 1189, the pit had been dug as an animal trap, and the children were a boy and a girl wearing clothes of unusual color and an unknown material. But even more bizarre was that they were both bright green, and not with envy. Their skin pigment literally had a strange green tint. And since that was kind of freaky, the confused children were quickly apprehended by reapers working the fields and brought to the nearby village. That all seems straightforward enough, but for what it's worth, there's no mention of the event in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles, which records details of English history up to the death of King Stephen in 1154. The Chronicle is full of stories about such weird events, basically making it the weird history of its day. so the failure to mention the green children has suggested to some that the event took place during the reign of Stephen's successor, Henry II. According to an historical record written by a Ralph of Coggeshall, the children were taken in by a wealthy landowner named Richard de Calne, who may have been a knight. It's hard to say because very little is known about Calne. After spending some time in Woolpit, the Green Girl eventually learned enough English to relay her and her brother's story. That story, which could easily pass for a prequel to The Wizard of Oz, or Wicked, was that the two came from a place called St. Martin's Land, a Christian nation where everything and everyone was bright green. The sun never shone, and the land was drenched in a perpetual misty twilight. She couldn't explain how she and her brother ended up in the East Suffolk village, but she did describe the sound of bells, which had entranced them and caused the children to lose track of time and location. One minute they were tending their flock and listening to bells. The next, they were in the Woolpit crop fields. Some accounts also note that the children traveled through some sort of cavern to reach Woolpit and were overwhelmed by the sunlight on the other side. While the girl could not place her homeland relative to Woolpit's location, the young She-Hulk claimed that it contained a considerable river, across which the inhabitants could see a bright land, which both William of Newburgh and Ralph of Coggeshall assumed was the area around Woolpit. As for where St. Martin's Land was located, well, that was anyone's guess. Some suggested it was another planet, or an underground world in the center of the Earth, while the less imaginative assumed it was just another village in England, or maybe Western Europe. In 1998, Paul Harris published an elaborate theory that suggested the children lived in or near the English village of Fornham St. Martin. For one, the name sounds like a dead giveaway. It's also just a few miles from Woolpit, and the two towns were separated by a river, albeit one much smaller than the girl described. That part seems convincing enough, but Harris didn't really have anything compelling to explain the bells or the tunnel, so take it for what you will. Anyway, after the children were taken in by the good people of Woolpit, they were offered many different types of food. However, the starving kids, who had apparently never been informed that beggars can't be choosers, seemed to have some very discerning tastes. Everything they were offered repulsed them. Everything, that is, except raw beanstalks, which were unfamiliar to them, which we should mention are also green. For months after that, those beanstalks were the only thing the children would eat. Of course, we've been burying the lead on the most extraordinary part of this puzzle, which is, why in the name of all that's good and holy did these kids have green skin? It's a question that has been speculated over quite a bit since the children were initially discovered, but frustratingly, there still isn't much in the way of a satisfying explanation. The 12th century populace of Woolpit jumped to the conclusion the kids were probably fairies, which were commonly accepted as real back then. Fairies were imagined to be supernatural beings who looked mostly human as far as appearance goes, and the children's account of St. Martin Land did make it sound like the kind of place fairies would hang out. Fairies were a real concern back then, due to the belief that a human could be trapped in the fairy world for all eternity, though this situation would obviously be the flip side of that. Of course, not everyone bought the whole fairy thing. In a 1621 book, The Anatomy of Melancholy, author Robert Burton was pretty adamant the kids were aliens, saying the children likely fell from the heavens from a planet where the sun never shone. Other analyses of the incident, such as that of Scottish author-astronomer Duncan Lunan, agreed. According to him, the children probably did not arrive in a flying saucer, but had the means to be instantaneously transported to our world directly from their own. Green-skinned creatures with beaming technology? Any other Star Trek fans thinking these kids were young Orions? One theory about the lime-colored kitties ties in with a 16th century folktale, The Babes in the Wood, a story which would later be adapted into Hansel and Gretel. In the story, two young orphans are taken in by their uncle, who then plots to kill them and steal their inheritance. In one early version, he plans to poison them with arsenic, which some believe accounts for the green skin. Those believers, however, are probably wrong, because while arsenic can darken your skin, it does not make you green. Another theory notes that the children were near starvation when they were discovered, and postulates that their refusal to eat anything but raw beans suggests they were probably suffering from hypochromic anemia, also known as chlorosis. This condition is caused by a poor diet that affects the color of red blood cells and can result in a noticeably green shade of skin. Whatever the cause of the green pigmentation, the accounts of William of Newburgh and Ralph of Coggeshall say that both children, or at least the girl, eventually lost the green hue after they started eating more than just beans. That being said, neither Billy Boy nor Ralphie Boy was an actual eyewitness to the events, so for all we know, those kids could still be green to this day. As you may have noticed, immigrants often have it tough. Even in the past, and the 11th and 12th centuries were a time of heavy immigration for the Flemish people who traveled to England from northern Belgium. If the children happened to be among those immigrants, it might explain how they ended up alone. Many Flemish people were taken out by Henry II's troops during a battle at Fornham St. Martin in 1173. Those troops typically just targeted other troops, while ordinary citizens were often left alone. But there are always exceptions. If that's the case, it is possible the unfamiliar language the children spoke was Flemish. Due to the aforementioned mass immigration, however, it seems unlikely that absolutely no one in Woolpit would have recognized it. Yes, Woolpit was a fairly small village, but it was just a few miles shy from the well-populated market town of Bury St. Edmunds. The network of roads and other paths that connect various villages and towns to the region would have brought foot traffic to Woolpit at the time, with people from all over speaking all varieties of language. If the strange language wasn't Flemish, however, it may just have been a dialect of English that was unfamiliar to the people of Woolpit. Around the 12th century, there were several different dialects spoken throughout England, depending on which region of the country someone came from. So it's at least possible the kids weren't from around those parts, and it's just that nobody from Woolpit recognized their dialect. Both William of Newburgh's and Ralph of Coggeshall's versions of the story state that the girl survived into adulthood, but they disagree on how long the boy lived. In Billy Newburgh's version of events, the boy passes away shortly after he and his sister are baptized, so we may be dealing with some sort of an omen situation here. Newburgh also claims that when the girl grew up, she got married, after which she lived for some time. But that's all he says. In Ralph of Coggeshall's version, however, the boy did not adapt well to living in Woolpit, was always languid and depressed, passing away before the two could be baptized. The girl, according to Ralph, grew up loose and wanton in her conduct, which strikes us as pretty judgmental on Ralph's part. But since he's dead, we're gonna let it slide. The aforementioned Duncan Lunan did some research into the genealogy of Richard de Calne and found a record from 1197, which may indicate that the girl took the name Agnes and married a justice, clergyman, and scholar named Richard Barr, who was a servant to Henry II. Lunan's claim is based on his discovery of a petition for land that featured names and dates he believes may be related to the Green Children. While no last names were given, nor any source of the inheritance, it is believed that the petition was from Richard de Calne's son, Walter, who did have a daughter named in the record. If Lunan is correct, it means Green Agnes would have grown up into a non-green adult woman and lived a life with a prominent husband. However, research by author John Clark points out there's no evidence the record is connected to anyone involved in the Green Children story. There also isn't a lot of direct evidence that de Calne ever knew anyone named Agnes, or that her alleged husband, Richard Barr, ever married anyone with that name. So while it is generally agreed the girl grew up and married, the rest of the story merits more of a red flag than a green light. So, what do you think? And do you have your own theories about what happened? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from Weird History.